Well, folks, we did it. After much deliberation and difficulties, we have finally been able to watch King Kong vs. Godzilla. Now, the reason why there was such a delay is because I was having a bit of trouble trying to find a stream of the original Japanese version. Now, I could have very easily watched the American version on YouTube. There is one available. However, as far as my own research was able to tell me, there's a few, little filler scenes that are changed or removed entirely for the American version. It's actually about 7 minutes shorter than the Japanese version. But also, I wanted to quash a bit of an urban legend from my childhood. I don't know how many of you Godzilla fans are actually still of this belief, even if it's a widespread concern, so to speak. But when I was growing up, there was an urban legend of the differences between the American and the Japanese version of King Kong vs. Godzilla. Of course, in the American version, spoiler alert, we're skipping quite a bit ahead here, but basically at the very end of the movie, as both monsters tumble into the sea, one monster comes out on top and is swimming off into the sunset. And the rumor was always in the American version it was King Kong, because of course America's greatest movie monster would win in the American versus Japanese clash. And then the rumor was in the original Japanese version it was actually Godzilla that'd be the one swimming off into the sunset. Well, I can tell you, if you're wondering, or if I'm just the last man on earth to find out, that no matter which version you're watching, it is King Kong that ultimately is on top and swims out into the ocean. Now, that's not to say that I believe King Kong won this battle. He may have gotten a technical W, but we'll get to in a moment why I feel like Godzilla is still prime king of the monsters. Now, we did take a little while to get there when it comes to Godzilla vs. King Kong, as there was quite a bit of setup here. We had a nuclear submarine essentially crashing into the glacier that originally trapped Godzilla at the end of Godzilla Raids Again, where we saw him in that epic battle against Anguirus, which I am now properly pronouncing as Anguirus for the Japanese versions. The dubs were saying Anguillus, and, thus my silly American brain. But either way, nuclear submarine crashes into the iceberg, and Godzilla eventually gets out and starts wreaking terror all over again. On the opposite side, we have Pacific Pharmaceuticals, both apparently a pharmaceutical company and an advertising firm, decides that they want to go capture King Kong of all things. They don't know he's King Kong at the time, but they're going to go capture King Kong for the sake of boosting their advertising revenue and having a reason to do a quality commercial. If that's the most American thing I've ever heard, then I don't know what is. So, bravo for that. Screw realism. That's just beautiful. But either way, we end up having a giant octopus fight as he tries to eat his mother and a small child on the island of Kong. And then King Kong makes his debut, knocks over a fence, decides he's going to grapple with the octopus. And I thought this was actually a really interesting scene, because it really showed this slow build-up to Kong arriving, with the villagers and the visitors to the island throwing their spears and rocks and firing guns, and just basically doing a really good job of showing that all these human-manufactured weapons and conventional forms of warfare did absolutely nothing to a giant octopus on this island. It's just like zero effect whatsoever, which really helped bring home the danger factor of King Kong as he makes his debut on this film and just picks up this giant octopus like he's nothing and starts just wrestling with the thing, and he ends up throwing it off of him like this easily just multi-ton Leviathan octopus. Just gets essentially smacked by King Kong, and it really helps. I think that really did help with developing the threat levels of King Kong for people that might not be familiar with his legend going into this movie. I don't know why you wouldn't be, but you know what? It is what it is. It's storytelling 101. So essentially, King Kong, after he brawls with the octopus, he drinks a lot of fruit juice. A lot of fruit juice. We're talking about barrels of fruit juice, which apparently, coupled with some very ominous tribal dancing and music, causes him to go to sleep. this plot becomes relevant, the plot device becomes relevant later on in the movie. But as he goes to sleep, that allows the pharmaceutical company to be able to hitch a ride to him onto the boat, in which it is revealed that the Japanese government views King Kong as smuggled goods, and says that the pharmaceutical company is going to be on the hook for any damages he causes to the populace. If only we could really hold the big pharma up to those standards in these days. Am I right, folks? I'm right. Anyway, so moving on from that, we have Godzilla, of course, doing his Godzilla things. I actually liked another part of this movie. It was a nice slow grind, as he's basically rampaging around right near a train track. And there's like a really nice tense moment where one of the titular characters and his love interest essentially get into a car and are both like just terrified, trying to hunker down and get away from Godzilla. And I thought they did a really good job of like capturing that feel of what it would feel like if you had this giant kaiju monster just like carelessly destroying everything around you. It's not targeting you specifically, but at any moment it could either accidentally or otherwise just murder you. And I think that captured that fear quite well. So both one for King Kong and one for Godzilla, in both building up the terror and tension of what these monsters can do on their own, let alone brawling with each other. Which, speaking of which, we actually get to a little bit of a prelude before the main event, where the two guys end up going into their so-called weigh-in, you could say, where it really brought me back to the old Star Wars prequels, where we had Godzilla. He's standing on elevated ground as King Kong rolls up and comes up to him, and Godzilla just breathes down fire on him, and he's like, "Don't do it, Kong again. I've got the high ground." And then King Kong, he's like, "Well, you know what, Goji Ben Kenobi, I'm going to go up there anyway." Actually, no, he doesn't, because King Kong is smarter than Anakin Skywalker. He sees that he's not going to beat this giant lizard while it's breathing fire down on him, and he walks away. Lessons that should have been learned 30 years ago. I mean, although Star Wars was far away place a long, long time ago, so maybe those whole events never saw Kong versus Godzilla. It's possible, You never notice much media in the Star Wars universe. But we're digressing. Anyway, moving on. So, we end up going down further on the line. Kong just ends up going off and starts fucking around Tokyo. Pardon my language. But he's just doing a little rampage, doing Kong things. He's like, if I can't fight Godzilla, I'll fight whoever. And he says, he ends up assaulting a train. He's like, "Ooh, pretty lady." And I'm like, we've seen this plot before. But you see King Kong, he grabs the girl, and he's walking around Tokyo, and he's just like, you can just see it on his face. He's thinking, man, there's a real lack of real tall buildings for me to climb right now. I'm feeling really self-conscious about my predicament. And so he climbs up the tallest building he can find, and they end up bringing back the pharmaceutical company. Apparently it has been manufacturing the drink, the berry juice that Kong was drinking on the island earlier. They've been doing it a while, apparently. And so they were able to hook up rocket launchers with this stuff. And they were able to cause King Kong to essentially fall into a slumber. And actually, I really liked another part of this movie was the human ingenuity of it all. Shortly before this scene, there was actually a time when they were trying to deal with Godzilla again in the best way that humanity knows how. And I really liked the cleverness of how they set everything up with like the pit and the distracting Godzilla with the fire to corral him into the pit full of explosives and just doing the best they can. It's always ineffectual, but I still appreciate the amount of thought that goes into trying to make sure that the Japanese Defense Force looks as competent as they can be in the face of danger. The same thing happens here. They eventually end up playing that music and the tribal drumming and kind of mist this berry juice all over Kong, which allows him to pass out. And they tie him up to a bunch of balloons. And he goes 99 loot balloons with Kong up in the sky as they fly over to Godzilla's position and drop him down. And this is the part where I mention about how the fact, even though ultimately, yes, Kong does get the win here by virtue of escaping the island, essentially. We never do see the body of Godzilla. They even question whether or not he could still be alive. He is. We still got about 30 plus movies to go, folks. We got a long road ahead of us. But at least in this context of this movie, like, Godzilla just trashes Kong. Like, Kong even gets, like, the drop on him, gets dropped down from the sky, gets the barrel into Godzilla, and they tumble down the hillside. And, like, even with an initiative bonus, like, Kong just does not fare well in a fair one-on-one fight against the King of the Monsters. But they don't just do fighting. They exercised all kinds of Olympic feats with each other. We had a little bit of baseball, Kong throwing a boulder at Godzilla and him batting it away with his tail. And they had a little bit of soccer, with King Kong kicking the boulder back at Godzilla. And, they had a lot of acrobatics as well, too, with a whole lot of tumbles. But all in all, just Godzilla just wrecked King Kong, pillar to post. The only thing that saved this poor gorilla was this magical Deus Ex Machina storm that never before has been mentioned and never again is brought up as far as I'm aware, that somehow a storm coming overhead grants King Kong magical lightning powers, which allows him to even stand a ghost of a chance against Godzilla. So they're fighting now, and King Kong has these new shocky powers. Every time he touches a Godzilla, it's causing an electric current. But even then, he's just barely keeping up with Godzilla. Godzilla sweeps him up, still basically beating the crap out of him. Kong's just really trying to hold on in several grapples with this big monster. Eventually, they both decide that, you know what, you're a bro, I'm a bro, we're going to destroy this pagoda together, and they just tag team this poor building for no reason whatsoever, until they eventually end up tumbling into the ocean, and then the end credits roll. So, does King Kong win in the battle? Basically. But is he the victor? I don't really think so. I think he survived Godzilla for just a little bit, and then ran back home to Skull Island, where we'll probably see him about 70 years worth of movies from now. But anyway, when it comes to that, this video has been a lot longer than my normal one, so I do apologize about that, but we had a lot of room to cover, and I really liked doing a deep dive into this one, because this is one of the most iconic monster movie fights of all time. King Kong vs. Godzilla. Moving on, next is going to be another iconoclast between Godzilla and one of his most, I wouldn't say bitter rivals, but one of his most iconic rivals and greatest allies later on in Mothra. We're going to be jumping right along into that movie and doing a review shortly for that as well. And until next time, folks, thanks for tuning in and stay just Quintastic.